Hey everyone, welcome to part one of what's probably going to end up being a 10-part CSS tutorial. In this first tutorial, what we're going to do is just go over the basics of CSS and go over some basic terminology that you'll encounter with CSS. And we'll also go over syntax and just give you a general idea about how CSS is used in a web page. Now, what CSS does is it allows the programmer to define a set of rules or styles that can be referenced using very simple selectors so that you're not constantly rewriting code over and over again when you're styling a web page. Now, if over here on the right, I've already created a blank CSS style sheet, and here I have our HTML page. Now, to embed the CSS into the page, most of your IDEs, if you just click on the file and then drag it over into the head where you want to put it, it'll automatically generate the HTML for you. But if you have to do it manually, it's a link tag that goes inside the head, and then you set the href to the URL of the style sheet, and then you set rel equal to style sheet, and the type is a text CSS file. And what happens is that when you embed this CSS file into the page, it will load all the definitions that you put in the style sheet that can be referenced by the rest of the page. So what I'm going to do is create, see, we already have a div here. So the first thing we're going to do is go over selectors. Now, a selector is I guess you could call it the definition that's used to determine what styles are applied to which elements. And now there's three different types of selectors. There's these generic selectors, which is just the name of the element. There are class selectors, which follow that syntax. And then there's unique identifier selectors, which look like this. Now, if we go back to our HTML page here, and we put an h1 tag in here, hello, then whenever we run the page, you'll see that we just have our h1 tag. So if we want to put styles, say we want to make this text red, then up here we can do a property and then give it a value, and RGB would be FF1234. So if we save that and then refresh our page, you'll see that hello world is now red. Now, say for instance we had multiple h1 tags on the page, and say hello world, hello Bob, and hello Mary. Now if we refresh that, you'll see that all the h1 tags are red because our selector is saying, you know, it's just the name of the element, it's not a class or an identifier. So these rules that we define inside the declaration are going to be applied to all h1 tags. Now, if we just wanted this to appear, let's say for hello Bob, and we want to do it with a class, then let's save our CSS. On the HTML element, you just type class equals, and then you type in the name of the class that you created, the CSS class. So if we save that and then refresh, you'll see that hello Bob is now the only h1 element on the page that has the color red, because class equals header is defined up here. So it's not going to apply it to every single h1 tag, it's only going to apply it to HTML elements that have this class. Now, that'll also let us say put it on multiple, we can use the same class in multiple places. So you'll see that Hello World and Hello Mary are both red now because we put the same class on different elements. Now the last type of selector is this little syntax here, pound and then name. And the pound denotes that it's unique, that the ID of the element is unique on the page. So when you select it, then no other element on the page can have that same ID. So that's how you know you're doing something very, very specific. So let's say we want to give him a color of green. And then we can declare that, we can assign that ID to an element just by doing ID equals as an attribute value pair and saying header. And then if we refresh this, you'll see that Hello Bob is now green. Now you can assign excuse me, the same ID to multiple elements, and it will technically work. But what you're doing, wow, what did I do there? Okay. In any case, it will work, but it's not W3 compliant, and every single CSS debugger out there and markup debugger will say that that's not invalid, so don't do that. Now, if you take a look back over here at our syntax, you'll see that we can break it down into numerous parts. This first part, the part in really dark red / maroon, that's called the selector. And as I showed you over here, that's used to select which element that the rules we define are going to be applied to. This part here in the middle between the two curly brackets, this entire highlighted text is called the declaration. And the declaration is just a property value pair that defines a rule for the CSS class that we're creating. The property here in red is one of hundreds of valid CSS properties here that you see that we can use to manipulate the behavior or appearance of HTML elements. After you have the name of the property, it's followed by a colon, not a semicolon, but a colon, which is then shortly followed by the value. Now this space here, that's not necessary. You don't have to have the space if you don't want to, but a lot of people do it just so it's a little bit easier to read. Now the value that we put here, there's only certain values that can go with certain properties. Like for a margin or a padding, you wouldn't put a hex color code because that wouldn't make sense. And then the declaration is ended with a semicolon. Now if we wanted multiple declarations in the same rule, it's just a semicolon delimited list. So say we want the text decoration to be underlined. We go back and we refresh this, and you'll now see that our header or headers, I'm going to go ahead and change that because that's not valid. You'll see that our header is now underlined and green because we told it that for the identifier header we want it to be green and also underlined. Now there's a couple of ways to include CSS in your page. You can do it like we've done it so far, where we put our rules in a style sheet and then we include the style sheet on the markup page. That's called linking to external CSS. But another thing we can do is create internal CSS, and we create a script tag, and then we do type is equal to text I'm sorry, it's not a script tag, it's a style tag. Style tag, and then type is equal to text CSS. And then this little space that we get between them, that's where we can include any rules we want. So say the body, if we wanted him to have a different background color, let's say a grayish color, we can save that as inline CSS, refresh the page, and then our HTML page now has a background color of gray. So what if we had this rule here, and then we had a similar rule defined as inline CSS right here, and then they weren't the same? What's going to happen is the inline CSS will take precedence over the CSS that's defined in our external style sheet. Now, whenever the page renders, it reads the page like a book, top to bottom, left to right. So what happens is it hits this line number 8 here, and it goes to find the style, and it'll say, you know, the color is this red color, FF quad 0. But then when it gets down here, it's defined as quad 0 FF, which is a blue. So this blue is going to override the red. So by the time that the page gets to the very bottom and it says, alright, what's the colors? This was the last color, red, so it's going to take precedence, and then your tag or your element is going to be blue because that was the last style that was red. That just about covers it for an intro into CSS. Hopefully at the end of this tutorial you've understood what CSS is, understand the basic syntax, what selectors are, what properties are, and what values are, and how to reference them from your HTML elements.